Have you ever been fired for something as silly as your own face? In 2022, my boss told me I was too serious and not smiling enough. They fired me like I was nothing after 8 years of loyalty. 2 years later, I came back with unexpected results. That's my story. And now I'm sharing my story. My name is Claire Anderson, and I am 38 years old. Today, I own a thriving marketing agency in Seattle, Washington, and I manage a team of talented people who actually love coming to work. But just a couple of years ago, my life looked completely different. I was sitting in a small gray cubicle, quietly doing the job I had poured my heart into for nearly a decade. I thought loyalty and hard work would always pay off. I thought showing up early, staying late, and delivering results would protect me from office politics. I was wrong. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and reputation mattered more than anything else. I was the girl who followed the rules, earned good grades, and believed that hard work spoke louder than charm. Smiling for no reason was never my thing. I smiled when something was funny, when I felt proud, or when life gave me a genuine reason. So, when I started working at Holland's Marketing Solutions, a mid-sized marketing agency in Seattle, I never thought my natural seriousness would become a problem. After all, I was not hired to entertain anyone. I was hired to create campaigns that made money. For 8 long years, I gave that company everything. I was the first to volunteer for difficult projects, the last to leave the office on deadline nights, and the quiet, dependable person everyone turned to when they needed a problem solved. My campaigns brought in major clients and hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. I trained new employees, helped my team hit impossible goals, and even skipped vacations to make sure everything ran smoothly. And yet, none of that mattered when my boss decided my personality did not fit his vision of a fun workplace. I still remember that day in 2022 as if it is burned into my memory. I walked into a Monday morning meeting expecting to go over client reports, maybe grab a coffee with my coworker Jenna afterward. Instead, I was greeted by Richard "Rick" Hollins, my 52-year-old boss, and Linda Brooks, the HR manager, sitting stiffly at a conference table with a stack of papers. Rick would not even look me in the eye. He leaned back in his chair and said in a flat voice, "Claire, we are going to let you go. You just do not smile enough." I thought I misheard him. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda gave me that fake sympathetic look HR managers seem to practice in a mirror. "Your attitude has been described as too serious, and it is affecting team morale," she said. I wanted to laugh. My attitude was the same for 8 years. I was focused, professional, and maybe a little quiet. But that was who I had always been. Suddenly, it was grounds for termination. I could feel heat rising in my chest as I signed the papers, my hands trembling. Walking out of that office with a cardboard box of my belongings, I felt humiliated, angry, and strangely free. For weeks, I spiraled. I lay on my couch watching the ceiling fan spin, wondering how my life could fall apart so quickly. I cried. I vented to Jenna, my 34-year-old friend and former coworker, who swore she would quit too. "They are fools, Claire," she said. "One day they are going to regret this." At the time, I could not imagine how that could ever happen. But the truth is, getting fired lit a fire in me I did not know I had. All that quiet anger and humiliation turned into fuel. I realized I did not want to beg for a seat at anyone else's table ever again. I wanted to build my own. I started small, offering freelance marketing services from my kitchen table. It was lonely and exhausting, but every client who trusted me felt like a tiny piece of my confidence coming back. And slowly, one small win led to another, until my name meant something in the industry. That is how I ended up here 2 years later, telling the story not as a bitter ex-employee, but as the owner of the very company that once told me I was not smiley enough to work there. Life has a funny way of letting you serve revenge cold, even when you were not looking for it. And believe me, walking back into that office as the new boss was sweeter than any smile I could have faked. Back in 2022, my world revolved around Holland's Marketing Solutions, a mid-sized agency tucked into a glassy high-rise in downtown Seattle. The office looked sleek and modern from the outside, but on the inside, it had the cold energy of a fish tank. Everything was spotless and shiny, but there was no warmth. We had those open floor plan desks that were supposed to encourage collaboration. But really, they just made it easier for everyone to watch each other like hawks. The walls were lined with fake greenery and motivational posters that said things like, "Smile, it's contagious," and "Teamwork makes the dream work," which felt like a joke once you had worked there long enough to know the truth. When I first joined the company, I was 30 years old and eager to prove myself. I had left my small-town life in Oregon to chase the dream of making it in the city. The first few months were exciting. I wore crisp blazers, drank overpriced lattes, and soaked up everything I could about digital marketing campaigns. I worked directly under Rick Hollins, the owner himself, who strutted around like he was some kind of king. At first, I admired his confidence. He had built the company from scratch, and I wanted to learn from him. Over time, though, I started to notice the cracks. He had favorites, usually the loud, extroverted employees who laughed at his jokes and joined him for happy hours. The culture at Holland's Marketing was not as friendly as it looked on the surface. Behind the glass walls and forced smiles, it was a competition disguised as teamwork. People whispered in corners, threw each other under the bus in emails, and smiled in your face while quietly plotting to get ahead. I was never part of the office gossip or the after-work bar scene. I had my friend Jenna Morales, who sat 2 desks over, and that was enough for me. We bonded over late nights finishing campaigns while everyone else had already gone home. She used to joke that we were the quiet backbone of the company. We kept the place running while the smilers played politics. Despite the toxic undercurrent, I genuinely loved the work itself. I was in charge of big campaigns for retail and lifestyle clients, the kind that could bring in hundreds of thousands in revenue if done right. There was something satisfying about seeing my strategies come to life, watching engagement numbers climb, seeing sales spike, and knowing that my quiet hard work was making the company money. Rick never complimented me, but I could tell he relied on me. Every time a client renewed a contract or gave positive feedback, he would nod with that smug satisfaction like it was all his doing. I told myself it was fine. I was not there for praise. I was there for stability, experience, and maybe one day, a promotion. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs that I ignored. The company valued appearances over results. Smiling, laughing, and being part of Rick's little social circle mattered more than actual talent. Even the office events reflected it. Every Friday, Rick would make a big show of hosting Fun Hour, which meant everyone had to gather in the break room and pretend to enjoy cheesy games and forced conversations. I usually stayed quiet in the corner with Jenna, holding a cup of soda and counting the minutes until it was over. I thought keeping my head down and doing excellent work would speak for itself. I did not realize that in Rick's world, you had to perform happiness to keep your job. The strangest part was that outside of work, my life was simple and happy enough. I lived alone in a cozy apartment in the Fremont neighborhood, a short drive from the office. I spent weekends cooking, hiking the nearby trails, and calling my parents back in Oregon. I was not the kind of person who needed constant attention or a spotlight to feel good. But inside that office, my natural quietness became a problem I did not know I had. It was like being trapped in a play where everyone else was acting, and I was the only one who forgot my lines. At the time, I still thought I had a future there. I was patient, loyal, and good at my job. I had no idea that all of that would mean nothing the day my smile, or the lack of it, became the reason my career at Holland's Marketing ended. That office, with its fake plants and glass walls, was about to become the backdrop for the most humiliating and life-changing moment of my life. The betrayal came on a Monday morning that started out like any other. I grabbed my usual coffee from the little cafe downstairs, rode the elevator to the 12th floor, and walked through the glass doors of Holland's Marketing Solutions with a list of tasks already buzzing in my head. I had a big client campaign launching that week, and I was determined to make it perfect. My desk was neat, my reports were ready, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. At least not until I got the email from Linda Brooks, our HR manager, asking me to come to the small conference room. My stomach dropped instantly. I stepped into the room and immediately felt the tension. Linda sat stiffly on one side of the table, and Rick Hollins was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. He did not even bother with small talk. His voice was flat, almost cold, as he said, "Claire, we are going to let you go." I blinked, trying to process his words. It was like my brain froze. Let me go? For what? I had never missed a deadline, never been late, never made a mistake big enough to warrant a warning, let alone a termination. When I finally found my voice, it cracked. "Can I ask why?" I said, even though a part of me already feared the answer. Rick leaned forward with that rehearsed look of false disappointment and said, "You just do not smile enough. You seem cold to the team, and it is bringing down morale." My jaw literally dropped. 8 years of loyalty, dedication, and revenue for the company, and I was being fired for my face, for not performing happiness like a circus act. Linda jumped in with her soft, careful HR voice. "We have received multiple observations from management that your attitude does not align with the company culture. We need positivity, Claire. This is about the overall team environment." I wanted to scream. My campaigns were the reason the team even had a job to come to. I wanted to tell them that fake smiles did not pay the bills. Results did. But instead, I sat there in shock, my hands trembling in my lap. Rick pushed the papers across the table. "We will give you 2 weeks severance," he said, like he was doing me a favor. My vision blurred as I looked at the termination form. 2 weeks, 8 years of work, erased in a single meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. I could feel humiliation burning in my chest as I signed the paper with a hand that barely stopped shaking. Walking back to my desk to pack my things was the longest walk of my life. The open office, with all its glass walls, suddenly felt like a stage, and I was the show everyone was watching. A few coworkers glanced at me, their faces awkward and guilty, while others just kept typing, pretending not to notice. Jenna Morales, my closest friend there, rushed over as soon as she saw my face. "Claire, what happened?" she whispered, panic in her eyes. My voice cracked again as I said, "They fired me for not smiling enough." Her jaw clenched so hard I thought she might march into Rick's office herself. I packed my things into a cardboard box, the same box I had once watched other employees carry when they were laid off. Only now I understood the shame that came with it. Walking out of those glass doors for the last time, I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and something I could not quite name yet. It was the feeling of betrayal sinking in, the realization that loyalty and results had meant nothing to them. I sat in my car in the parking garage for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking too much to drive. 8 years of hard work, of believing in that company. And it all ended because I did not force a smile on my face every day. I did not know it then. But that moment, sitting alone in my car, humiliated and furious, was the spark that would change my entire life. The first few weeks after I was fired were some of the darkest days of my life. I had spent 8 years waking up to the same routine, and suddenly, there was nothing. No alarm clock, no commute, no reason to dress up in the mornings. I stayed in bed until noon, scrolling through job listings with the dull ache of rejection settling into my chest. My apartment, once my peaceful little retreat in Fremont, started to feel like a prison. Every corner reminded me that I was unemployed, unwanted, and humiliated. I kept replaying that meeting in my mind. Rick's cold voice, Linda's fake sympathy. Those exact words, "You just do not smile enough," echoed over and over until they made me angry all over again. Sometimes I would sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing, and imagine all the ways I could have stood up for myself. I thought about calling Rick, writing an angry email, or blasting my story online. But every time, I just sank back into silence, feeling small and defeated. The anger was there, simmering under the surface, but the exhaustion was stronger. My friend Jenna Morales called me almost every day. "Claire, you are the smartest, hardest working person I know," she said, her voice filled with the kind of conviction I could not find in myself. "They are going to regret this. You will see." I wanted to believe her, but all I could think about was my mortgage, my dwindling savings, and the crushing weight of failure. I had spent so long believing that loyalty and skill would protect me, and now I was sitting in my living room in sweatpants, feeling like my entire career had just evaporated. One night, I went out for a drive just to clear my head. The city lights of Seattle blurred through my windshield as I thought about everything I had sacrificed for that job. All the late nights, skipped vacations, and holidays spent finishing campaigns. I had given Holland's marketing my best years, and they had tossed me aside like I was disposable. The resentment grew heavy in my chest, but somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark began to form. It whispered, "You are not done. You are not broken. You just need to figure out what comes next." The turning point came one morning when I opened my laptop to check my bank account. Seeing the number dip lower than I was comfortable with jolted me awake like a splash of cold water. I realized that I could not stay in this pit of self-pity forever. I had two choices: let this experience define me as a failure, or use it as fuel to rebuild my life on my own terms. For the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest flicker of determination. I started by taking on small freelance marketing projects, reaching out to local businesses who needed help with social media and digital campaigns. At first, it felt strange to work from my kitchen table, using my personal laptop instead of a fancy office setup, but each tiny success made me feel alive again. I was still angry, still hurt, but now I had something to channel it into. I had no idea then, sitting in my little apartment with coffee and my laptop, that this slow crawl out of the darkness was the first step toward the most unexpected and satisfying chapter of my life. Once the initial shock and grief faded, something inside me changed. I woke up one morning, looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and thought, enough. I was tired of feeling powerless, tired of letting Rick Hollins and his fake smiles live rent-free in my head. I had spent weeks drowning in self-pity, but somewhere beneath the resentment was a spark I had ignored for years, the quiet belief that I could build something of my own. I had spent almost a decade helping someone else get rich. Why not take those skills and do it for myself? I started small, almost hesitantly. I made a simple website offering freelance digital marketing services and posted about it on LinkedIn and a few local business forums. At first, the jobs were tiny. Restaurants that needed social media posts, a small clothing boutique that wanted help with email campaigns. I worked from my kitchen table with my laptop and a secondhand ring light I bought online for video calls. It was not glamorous, but the first time a client paid me directly for my work, I felt a thrill I had never felt at Holland's Marketing. This was mine. My work, my client, my win. The early days were exhausting. I pulled long nights teaching myself everything I could about scaling a freelance business. I watched tutorials, read case studies, and sometimes worked until 2 a.m. while the city outside my window went quiet. My little apartment became a mix of an office and a war room, with sticky notes covering the walls and empty coffee cups piling up on the counter. There were moments of doubt. I would stare at the ceiling and wonder if I was crazy to think I could make this work. But every new client, every dollar earned, pushed that doubt a little further away. By mid-2023, my efforts started to pay off. Word of mouth spread faster than I expected. One client referred me to another, and then another. I began working with small but growing companies that wanted real marketing results. Not just empty smiles and office games. The best part? My clients respected my work. They did not care if I was quiet or if I smiled on Zoom calls. They cared that I delivered results. For the first time, I felt truly free. Like I was building a life where no one could fire me for my personality. The real turning point came when I met Marcus Lee, a 41-year-old business investor who had been following my freelance projects online. He reached out and invited me for coffee at a little cafe by the waterfront. I almost said no because part of me was still nervous about meeting anyone in person for business, but something told me to go. Marcus was calm, professional, and genuinely curious about my work. After I walked him through my growing list of clients and results, he leaned back and said, "Claire, you have something here. Have you thought about starting your own agency?" His words lit up a part of me I did not realize was still dreaming. I had thought about it, sure, but hearing someone with real business experience say it out loud made it feel possible. Over the next few weeks, we met several times to discuss a plan. Marcus had the capital and the connections, and I had the skills and the drive. In the fall of 2023, we officially launched Bright Path Marketing, a full-service agency that was mine in every way that mattered. The first time I signed a contract under the Bright Path name, I felt a rush of pride and disbelief. I had gone from a humiliated ex-employee to a business owner with a growing team and real clients who valued my expertise. I was still fueled by quiet anger, but now it was the kind that built something instead of breaking me down. And deep down, a thought I tried not to say out loud began to form. One day, Rick Hollins is going to see my name again, and he will remember the woman he fired for not smiling enough. By the winter of 2023, the air in my life felt different. I was no longer waking up with that heavy pit of dread in my stomach. Instead, I woke up excited to check my emails, because every new message meant another client who wanted to work with Bright Path Marketing. The agency that Marcus and I started in a tiny co-working space was growing faster than I could have imagined. Our first month, we signed 3 clients. By the third month, we had 10. My calendar was packed, my phone rang constantly, and for the first time in years, I felt like my work was truly my own. The first time we landed a major account, a regional retail chain looking to revamp its online presence, I nearly cried in my car after the meeting. They chose us over bigger, flashier agencies because our pitch was practical, clear, and results-focused. I remember Marcus looking at me with that steady grin and saying, "See, Claire, no fake smiles required." That line stuck with me. He was right. I had built a business where I could show up exactly as I was, serious when I needed to be, smiling when I genuinely felt it. The success was not just financial, it was emotional. Each client win, each successful campaign, each positive testimonial chipped away at the lingering bitterness I carried from Holland's marketing. I was proving to myself that I was never the problem. It had never been about my skills or my dedication. The problem was that I had been working in a place that valued appearances over ability. And the more BrightPath grew, the more I realized I was building the kind of company I had always wanted to work for, one where results and respect mattered more than forced positivity. Despite the whirlwind of new opportunities, I worked harder than ever, often 12-hour days fueled by coffee and adrenaline. Marcus handled the investments and operations, while I focused on client relationships and campaign strategy. Every late night in that co-working space felt different from the late nights at Holland's marketing. Back then, I worked out of fear of disappointing someone, fear of losing my job. Now I worked out of passion and ambition. I was building something that no one could take away from me. Around that time, Jenna visited me at the office. She had finally left Holland's marketing after another round of layoffs. She walked into our modest space with its mismatched desks and whiteboards covered in plans, and her eyes lit up. "Claire, this is incredible," she said, spinning slowly to take it all in. "I always knew you were meant for more than that place." Hearing those words from her, standing in my own office, was the first time I allowed myself to feel proud instead of just relieved. By the end of 2023, BrightPath had its first six-figure month. I paid myself a salary that was double what I ever earned at Holland's marketing. And for the first time, I felt financially secure and emotionally free. Yet, even in that joy, I felt a quiet curiosity about the old company. I had not spoken to Rick or Linda since the day I left, but sometimes, late at night, I wondered how things were going for them. I had no idea that the universe was already setting the stage for a twist I could never have scripted better myself. The call that changed everything came on a gray Thursday morning in early 2024. I was in my office at BrightPath Marketing, reviewing the results of a recent campaign, when my phone buzzed with a call from Jenna Morales. I answered casually, expecting a friendly check-in, but her voice came through sharp with excitement. "Claire, have you heard the news? Holland's marketing is going bankrupt. They are shutting down operations and looking for a buyer." For a moment, I just sat there in stunned silence, my pen frozen in midair. Bankrupt? The same company that had fired me for not smiling enough? The same office where I had walked out humiliated, carrying a cardboard box? I leaned back in my chair and let the irony sink in. "Are you serious?" I finally said, my voice somewhere between disbelief and a laugh. Jenna confirmed it. "Serious as a heart attack. Rick has been losing clients left and right for months. Apparently, some of the smiley people he loves so much were not so great at actually doing the work." When I hung up, I just stared at the ceiling for a long minute, letting the information wash over me. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me was curious. And a quiet, calculating part of me, the same part that had crawled out of the darkness to start my own business, was suddenly awake. I opened my laptop, did a quick search, and there it was. A formal notice that Holland's Marketing Solutions was seeking acquisition offers. I brought the news to Marcus Lee that afternoon. He listened calmly, his fingers steepled, while I explained the situation. When I finished, he raised one eyebrow and said, "Claire, this is an opportunity. We could buy it, absorb its resources, and expand BrightPath overnight. And let's be honest, it would be satisfying, wouldn't it?" I tried to act neutral, but I could feel the corner of my mouth twitching into a smile I could not suppress. Satisfying? did not even begin to cover it. This was poetic. This was the universe handing me a plate of cold revenge. The next few weeks were a blur of negotiations, paperwork, and due diligence. Rick looked older when I finally saw him in a meeting. His once perfect confidence cracked under the weight of failure. He sat across from me, the same man who once told me I was too cold for his company, and now he was the one sweating. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I simply signed the documents alongside Marcus. And by the end of the first quarter of 2024, BrightPath Marketing officially acquired Holland's Marketing Solutions for $2.3 million. When the deal closed, I went home that night and sat in my living room in silence, just absorbing what had happened. 2 years ago, I had left that company in tears, feeling like a failure. Now, I owned it. I could walk back through those glass doors not as a victim, but as the boss. For the first time since that humiliating day in 2022, I smiled. Not because anyone demanded it, but because life had finally, beautifully come full circle. The first morning, I walked back into the old Holland's marketing office as the new owner was surreal. The same glass doors that I had walked through with a cardboard box 2 years ago now opened for me with a soft click. I could still see every detail of that place in my memory. The fake plants, the motivational posters, the cold glow of the overhead lights. But this time, I was not an employee dreading a lecture or a meeting. I was the boss. I was the woman signing everyone's paychecks. I chose that day to make my entrance quietly, without any grand announcement. The few remaining employees looked up in shock as I walked across the open floor in my black heels, a calm smile on my face. My friend Jenna had insisted I wear something sharp, and I had picked a tailored navy suit that made me feel like a walking victory. For the first time, I smiled, not because anyone demanded it, but because I owned the building, the furniture, the coffee machine, everything they once told me I did not belong in. When I reached the corner office, Rick Hollins was waiting for me. He had already cleared out most of his personal things, but his posture told the story of a man who had aged 10 years since I last saw him. His voice was quiet as he said, "Claire, I never thought I'd see the day." I met his gaze calmly, with none of the fear or trembling I had felt in 2022. "Neither did I said, my voice steady. "But here we are." I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. Just standing there, as the new owner, was victory enough. I took a slow walk through the office after that, greeting the employees who had survived the layoffs. Some looked nervous, unsure of what my leadership would mean. Others looked quietly hopeful, maybe even relieved. I stopped by Jenna's old desk, the same spot where we used to whisper jokes to survive the long nights. It was empty now, but just seeing it reminded me how far I had come. Every humiliation, every tear I had shed in that building now felt like fuel that had carried me to this exact moment. The first change I made as owner was simple. I removed every single fake motivational poster from the walls. I replaced them with real statements about our goals, our values, and the truth of the business. We succeed because we work smart. We respect our people. Smiles are optional. That last line made Jenna laugh out loud when she visited later that week. It was my quiet nod to the past, a reminder that no one would ever be judged here for their natural expression again. There was no yelling, no dramatic speeches, no public shaming of Rick. The real revenge was in my calmness, in the simple fact that I had turned their rejection into my empire. Walking out of that office that day, keys in hand, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had closed a chapter not with anger, but with undeniable success. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not in getting even. It is in rising so high that the people who tried to break you are forced to watch. Taking over Holland's Marketing, now merged under the BrightPath Marketing name, was more than a business move. It was a transformation for both the company and for me. The first few months were a whirlwind of rebuilding, hiring, and rebranding. I walked into a place that once made me feel small and invisible, and I turned it into a space full of energy, creativity, and respect. The glass walls and shiny desks stayed, but the culture changed overnight. Smiles were no longer required. Results, respect, and collaboration became the new currency. Employees who had lived in quiet fear under Rick's rule began to thrive. Some of the quieter, more focused team members who had been overlooked started stepping up with brilliant ideas once they realized their voices mattered. The office became warmer, more human. People laughed because they wanted to, not because they were performing for anyone. And in that new environment, the company's numbers started climbing faster than they ever had under the old management. Clients loved the energy. Revenue grew. BrightPath was no longer a small startup fighting for space. It was a rising star in Seattle's marketing scene. Personally, the transformation was just as profound. For the first time in my life, I felt free from the weight of needing to prove my worth to people who would never see it. I was no longer the quiet woman trying to survive in someone else's world. I was building my own. Every day I walked into that office as the owner, I remembered the woman I had been 2 years ago, humiliated, shaking, and doubting everything about herself. That version of me would not even recognize the person I had become. Jenna officially joined BrightPath as our client relations director, and watching her thrive was another layer of satisfaction I could not put into words. One afternoon, she leaned against my office doorway and said with a grin, "Do you realize you've done it? You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into the best thing that ever happened to you." I just smiled, genuinely this time, and nodded. She was right. My firing had felt like the end of my career, but it had actually been the beginning of my freedom. There were moments of quiet reflection when I stayed late, looking out the 12th floor window at the city lights, thinking about the journey, the pain, the humiliation, the months of doubt. They had all shaped me into someone stronger. I had learned that success is not about pleasing everyone or forcing yourself to fit into someone else's version of culture. It is about knowing your worth, trusting your skills, and sometimes letting life's sharpest setbacks become the fuel for your greatest rise. If there is one thing my story has taught me, it is that life has a strange way of turning your lowest moments into the foundation for your greatest victories. Being fired for not smiling enough was humiliating, unfair, and devastating at the time. But it forced me to stop living for someone else's approval. It pushed me to take control of my life, to bet on myself, and to build something that no one could take away from me. The pain I felt walking out of that office with a cardboard box became the fuel that carried me to owning that same office 2 years later. I learned that revenge does not always have to be loud or cruel. The best revenge is proving to yourself that you are stronger than the people who doubted you. It is rising so high that their words no longer hurt, because your life speaks louder than anything they ever said. When I walked back into that building as the owner, I did not need to yell or gloat. My presence alone was enough to close the circle. I had turned rejection into power and humiliation into opportunity. To anyone listening who feels trapped, overlooked, or undervalued, your worth is not defined by the opinions of small-minded people. A single setback, no matter how crushing, does not end your story. It might just be the first page of a better chapter. Use your pain as fuel. Use your anger as energy. Turn the no you were given into the reason you create your own yes. Today, I run a thriving marketing agency with a team that believes in each other and in the work we do. I wake up every morning knowing that my life belongs to me, not to a boss who demands a fake smile. And sometimes, when I walk past the glass doors of the old Holland's office, I smile, not because I have to, but because I truly want to. Life has a way of rewarding patience, resilience, and quiet determination. And if my story proves anything, it is that even the worst day of your life can be the beginning of something extraordinary